Hey everybody, we are here today with a drummer, musician, Tim Andreas. How you doing,
That's
man?
right. Good, Rob. How you doing?
Pretty good, man.
Good.
So, you and I have known each other a couple years now, and you are a drummer.
I am.
Mm. And so, first of all, what is up with like drummers getting no respect?
Jeez, that's a loaded question, Rob. I think that is it's an age-old deal. A joke coming into any auditions. What do you call a guy that hangs around with three musicians? Aha, a drummer.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But I don't know. It's difficult to put into words exactly what that is, but. I think there's this general, feeling that a drummer is somebody that doesn't actually play a tune, so therefore somehow he's not an actual musician. But I will argue the point that that is actually a misnomer, because most drummers, when you think about it, have to carry that, backbone of a song along with the rhythm section, bass guitarist, and so to say that there is not musicality to that is definitely a false statement. But what you do is you tend not to be defensive and you just roll with the punches.
Yeah,
That's
right.
what I really do. Sometimes I'll throw a little rib back. It's like, well, yeah, what do you call a drummer that hangs around with three other guys? It's a guy with a job.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So talk about that. How many times do guys ask you to like call a tune?
You know what? I'm going to say it doesn't happen very often when I'm asked to call a tune.
Mm-hmm.
Usually it's, do you know this tune?
Yep.
And generally the answer is close or maybe. Let's start rocking it and see how it goes.
Right.
Especially like a jam session or something like
Sure.
that, where you might have a bunch of old, standards and what have you.
Mm-hmm.
But ordinarily in like an audition type setting or a situation like that, it's more or less preset. You're going to go into a situation where you have an audition list of let's say 5 songs, and bang those out, and then it might migrate at that point into what else do you know?
Yeah.
Kind of
And then they're kind of asking you.
Right.
Yeah. So you already alluded to this a little bit, which was my next question. Like, what's the role of a drummer? What's your job in a band?
Well, that's interesting because a lot of times I've talked to a lot of drummers that perhaps don't have professional experience, and they have this almost I'm an accompaniment instrument type feeling. But a drummer is also more than an accompaniment instrument. It is the backbone, it's the spine of the music. And there's all the talk about click track, no click track, how does that work within a live setting and so on and so forth. But I think what that does is if a band can learn to center themselves around the meter of a song instead of the groove or a feeling on the song, the groove and the feeling comes back in, but it's on tempo. And so often when a band resists that, the drummer actually being the backbone, the spine of the music, you can have a little bit of chaos going on, because you can kind of create swampy sounds and what have you to kind of migrate back and forth around the meter with instruments, stringed instruments and what have you. But with a drum, you're percussive, you're punctuative. It's going to stand out if you're not tied in directly with the instruments. So I think a good drummer knows how to steer the band where he needs it to be, and in so doing, I think he becomes that that gospel of according to drummer tempo, and it's going to be that way, and the music will follow suit. And likewise, like I said, the groove and all that will fall back into place when the band becomes more comfortable with that sort of thing.
So because you're obviously not, as a drummer, not responsible for like pitches in general,
Right.
but you are very much responsible for the rhythm of the song. So would you say that your job is to kind of help them stay there?
Absolutely.
A little bit,
Yeah, absolutely.
Not that they don't need to have some of that in themselves already, I mean, you
Right.
can't be their metronome for them.
Right.
It's to help, right? I mean,
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that it when you can trust your rhythm section as a musician, you have more fluidity to what you do. It's kind of like singing along with the radio. You may feel very comfortable singing a song in your car going down the road, and you hit all the vocal gymnastics and everything, just like that singer did on that cut track. But then when somebody's strumming a guitar and asking you to do it, you fall off the tracks, and you find it hard to fit in certain amounts of swag into that small segment. But why is that? It's because you're not comfortable with it. And when a band can learn to be comfortable with that the drummer is that meter and he is establishing that, then you can just feel comfortable doing it the way you know it's supposed to go and not try to guess where he's going next. So I think that's a good deal.
Yeah, and my teacher, my original orchestra teacher in high school, talked to us about this rule that if you don't play in tune, nobody wants to hear you, and it's this really crazy, like, it's this hard it's kind of a rough rule to tell kids, basically you're not playing in tune, so everybody thinks you suck, but I would add a second one to that of, if you don't play in time, nobody really wants to play with you.
Oh, absolutely.
And I think that's another rough rule to kind of tell somebody that doesn't feel very good. Right. It's not a very ooey gooey feeling, but is there some truth to that?
Oh yeah, definitely so. And I think the feeling is mutual, unfortunately, because going back to the first statement, drummers are not musicians, the general feeling out there, and I think that's more of a joke than it is an actual, a feeling. It just gives some sort of comedic relief sometimes in a band setting. But the fact is that oftentimes a drummer with impeccable tempo and timing can pick up on everybody's lack thereof, and then there becomes this rub. That's where the push is. It's like, well, who's wrong? Well, it's obviously the drummer, because we did fine just before this guy showed up. Well, maybe they had a drummer that wasn't used to, directing, let's say. And so he followed, and he found himself well acquainted with, navigating the, bumpy waters of wherever they went rhythmically in that song. I found myself in that situation quite a bit, and I can ordinarily fix wherever somebody else bobbles without, doing this rough transition, just kind of steering it, if you will. And it's difficult, as I mentioned before, with percussive instrument, because, you can play with, micro timing. You can't really play with, eighth note timing or something like that if something jumps the beat, because then it's going to be very evident.
Right.
So I think that door swings both ways. There are drummers out there that struggle with timing, and that's
the whole point of why they're there.
Exactly. I mean, if you don't have timing and you're a drummer, you might want to think about something else, harmonica or something.
Right.
That might be a good one.
Yeah. You just said something really interesting that I'd never even really thought of till you just said that, is that when you have the band, they've had a previous guy, he's had a certain reaction to their playing, then you get another guy who's really, really good, and they're used to this guy basically saving them. Right. The first guy was the savior because he just followed them wherever they went. They slowed down, and he has a really good ear. He adjusts well, and his attitude isn't combative, right? We'll talk about the personality roles, but he didn't have a combative attitude, and so he was just able to, yes sir, no sir, he had that kind of mentality and was just following them. Then they get another really good guy, and I think that's really interesting that you said that, because now all of a sudden he has this attitude towards the other guys where he's like, I can feel it, you guys are slowing down, and I'm pushing you, and then they come off that he's wrong. Right. I thought that was really interesting that you said that, because, definitely that happens when we have a band that's been together, and then they go through, they like a core of 3 people, and then they get different drummers and bass players, for example, in and out of the band, and then all of a sudden they think this guy's really bad, but really, he's kicking their butt, and
he's exposing flaws is what he's doing, which is interesting, because a lot of times I've had this happen on multiple occasions where there's been, hey, you're dropping the tempo in there, and and I'll rebut that and say, no, I'm actually holding the tempo, and you're
Right.
dropping the tempo because the groove of the song or the funk you're feeling, especially in like slower, funk, tempos or beats, where you might feel that, it's real, punctuative type, feel to it. But it also has a kind of laid back feel to it, and oftentimes that's translated into slowing down.
Yeah.
But it's just like playing a 3/4 or a threes over fours. It feels slower on the threes than it does on the fours, right? You got that, but it's the same. You got your 1, 2, 3, 2. No, you got your 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4. So it feels faster, but technically it's the same tempo.
Yeah.
So you run into stuff like that with those grooves, and interesting because when I've had those situations, sometimes like, let's just go ahead and throw this on the click. I'm going to have it in my ear, and let's see if I'm falling off the tracks or if you're falling off the tracks, and come to the same segment of the song. We're in two different universes by this point on the meter, and I look at them, I say, I'm still on the click.
Yeah.
I haven't moved. Turn the click on where it's audible to everybody. Sure enough, I'm still on the click.
All right.
So doesn't make me perfect or to say, that I don't make mistakes, but you got to also give credit where credit is due when a guy spends his whole life, studying an instrument which is predominantly rhythm. That's what we do. We count time. We figure out things in timing signatures and in and out of timing signatures and things like that, so we can be a little bit more unique than a 4/4 slammer, So.
And that's the funny moment. I've had this with students all the time. They're like that metronome's speeding up, and you're like, no, you're slowing down. It's like, and that, so they think you're like, and that happens a lot. I think when we get these two extremes, because the fast stuff, I think a lot of times we slow down because it's harder, and then the slow stuff we speed up in general. So when you're getting that slow stuff, and they're like, you're slowing down, then you're like, no, you're actually speeding up. I'm staying right here. It feels like I'm speeding up, but really I'm staying, and so I know that's got to be kind of frustrating in general to deal with guys like that. The other drumming question I had that was really funny to me is when people, like for me, I notice a lot that there's like these three ways kind of to play a straight beat, three very different kind of sounds, where you have the same quarter, and you can do it like a boom chuck the whole time, which would be more like a country,
right?
And then you do like a boom chuck boom chuck boom chuck boom chuck boom chucka doom, and that chucka doom is when, or you could do it in like a bossa,
right?
If somebody flips, or you go straight to like a train, so there's like 4 or maybe like 30 different ways to play that same straight beat.
Right.
When somebody does that on me, that never like screws me up ever, because I'm counting, But and I forgot to mention this. We may not, just for nice sake, we might be able to talk about him, but we might not mention his name of the band we were in, but
sure.
but just because we're nice. But when we were in that band together, that was something of him as an example of some people when we're expecting the drummer to just stay there, and then when the drummer wants to maybe not do a fill every 5 seconds, but do something a little bit interesting with it, and then some people just lose it, like they can't follow it or whatever. That's got to be frustrating, right?
Yeah, it is. Because you're almost taking, it's like, and I always hate to make comparisons with great guitar players or this and that, but it'd be like taking Eddie Van Halen and saying, okay, well we just want you to play rhythm,
Right.
None of those taps and pull offs and pentatonic, just play rhythm, because we fall off the tracks when you start doing all that other stuff.
It's blasphemy, right? It's
no
almost,
disrespect to Eddie Van Halen. I won't rank myself amongst that category, but the fact is that when I want to play a song and I want to put something into that song, typically, especially playing cover tunes, I'm going to do as good as I can to try to cover it identically, maybe not exactly beat for beat and all the, fills, Although I'll tell you, I do a pretty good, job of pulling that off. When I set my mind to it.
As close to the recording as you can.
As close as I can, because I think that's respect to the original artist. I mean, that's just the way I feel about that. But but sometimes I want to showcase a little bit of what I do. I just did something at a show down at Lake of the Ozarks like that, where I took a great drummer's segment and I feel like I kind of made it mine, a little bit. Yeah. And I was real happy with it, and it was kind of flashy. It probably wouldn't have fit for the time, but it worked out really well. But yeah, I've had multiple occasions where I've played a song how it goes. And I'll have a guitar player, and I had one just recent. A good friend of mine just passed away. Fantastic guitar player, but he was real buggy about that. He turned around. He's like, "Man, it's too busy. It's too busy. Simplify, because I'm losing where I'm at." So So I try to have a certain amount of sensitivity, but I also like to be true to the original cut if I can. Out of pure respect, if nothing else. But I want to have fun too. Come on.
Yeah, I know, and that's always where I'm sure I don't have to deal with that, definitely with the kind of being a solo instrument, but being a kind of more of a lock it down part of the band, that's got to be a teetering act that you've got to really do. I mean, that leads me to my next point of kind of the difference, because you play a lot of like heavy stuff, definitely a lot. You've had a lot of experience playing rock,
right?
And but then when you roll over to like country, it's the same instrument,
right?
And it's the same general role. Mm-hmm. But what would you say, like, of those couple of genres that you played specifically drums on? Like, what are some of the differences there that you've noticed?
Well, I would say probably one of the biggest things that I noticed, and I don't want to make any cliche remarks towards any genre of music, because everything has its uniqueness, but country western, or let's just say country in general, is maybe let's narrow it down to a little more like outlaw music and things like that. Has a very standard beat. Most of the songs you could stay on one shuffle and work through 25 songs and never change beats or tempos, and it'd fit. And formulaically the songs are typical. It goes through 4 stanzas and a da 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 dum. I mean, so you got the same thing that you're kind of working around all the time. It can make for somewhat of a boring situation. I know a lot of, there's a lot of more modern country, which is kind of crossover. It's more rock, and they get interesting. Some of those drummers are fantastic. I mean, you listen to the, Jason Bolins and Jason Aldeans and, Jake Owen and some of these guys out there. Great drummers, and really pulling off some, really unique stuff. But as a whole, I find that, the old standards, pretty boring to play. Not a whole lot of uniqueness to them.
Those old waltzes got to be just torturous, huh?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, they can carry you up after a while. Yeah. Well, and moreover, you got to watch falling asleep, because you're bored to death and you're back there playing, and here comes a change in the song, or a segue or an ending, and it's like, oh, where was I again? You were looking for some cue, some vocal cue. It's like, he's not singing nothing. Come on. But yeah, so there's definitely that. But to contrast that, say for instance, with a typical rock genre, even pop stuff and top 40s. I mean, I listen to some things. I mean, listen to Toto. Listen to, I was listening to Mr. the other day. I'm not a huge fan of the band, but certainly I'll give respect. There's some segments in that drumming, and it's jazzy, and he's tearing it up. And listen to it. It kind of, it was one of those moments. I'm thinking this is a pretty straightforward song, but he does some things in there to try to accent on the cymbals and things and offbeats, and some cool kick beats, dun 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 dun. He's got that kind of feel to it, and then he's on a ding ding dun 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 dun. So he's got this nice little off tempo feel in there. You're seldom gonna find that in country. But then moving more into like a rock feel, or more metal, migrating more out of the top 40 stuff to, maybe some commercial metal or hair metal kind of stuff. Now you're super punctuative, you're accenting and actually playing on time with certain breaks and fills and things like that, where it requires stops, lots of stops and things like that. you got to be on your toes. There's nothing boring about that, and that's where it gets fun. You know?
Right.
And you migrate a little farther into some more alternative stuff where you're playing more polyrhythms and things like that.
Yeah.
Certainly no room to fall asleep. And lots of
Yeah.
fun. But then, you might, depending on who you are as a drummer, some of that might actually be over the top to find a level of, middle ground where you're actually happy drumming too, because that can become a job,
Right. Yeah, and that's an interesting point about the this is I mean, we could go all night on this topic of the finding that balance of it being not too boring but not homework either.
Right.
And that may, I don't know if that's what you're kind of implying, where you get into some of these types of music, especially when you get into like odd meters and stuff like that, where you can kind of, you can go into the practice room for days and never come out, and it can be like too much of a mind screw,
Yeah, it's a lot of pressure, Interestingly, I played with a country band. I was invited to come out and play, and when I say it's formulaic, and once you kind of have a good handle on how the music works, you can almost show up blind or cold.
Yeah.
And I had a guy send me 60 songs at 11 o'clock in the morning.
Right.
11 o'clock in the morning, and he's like, we got a 4-hour show we're playing tonight. And
Be ready.
How many of these do you know? And I'm looking over the list. I'm like, and I'm asking him questions like, well, who does this song? He's like, man, you're scaring me. I was like, well, you're not the one that just sent a 60, or received a 60 song set list that you got to try to perform tonight. Well, so I get this set list, and I go down and I set clicks to everything. I find, either YouTube videos or MP3 downloads, and I spent probably 4 hours, getting ready for this thing, and just kind of going over intros and endings. So I got a little, clipboard, wrote down my endings and my intros on each one of these songs, have a meter set, and I kind of count off so I know how to bring each song in.
You're such a nerd.
Oh, yeah, I know. Somebody's got to do it, right? So I get this thing all rigged up. I got
freaking brown nose. No, just kidding.
I know, right?
Brown noser.
So I show up. I don't even know these guys. I've never met the guitar player, never met the bass guitar player, which is scary when you've never met your wingman, And steel guitar player shows up out there, and I'm literally still trying to go over some of these songs in the car. Wife's driving, on the way over there. Well, we get in there, and I set up my little click in here, so I'm, comfortable, because bear in mind, again, I don't know these songs. I just know the basic formulas on them. So we click this set off. We get all the way through this set, and the bass guitar player turns around, and he's talking to the lead guitar player and singer, and he's like, that drummer really messed that song up. Doesn't he know that song? And I looked at him and I said, man, I don't know any of these songs. I said, so 60 songs you got to try to pull off a set list for that night.
In one day.
Yeah, in one day. So, but, I felt pretty good on boogering up one song on that whole deal.
Yeah, that's cool, man.
But conversely, if you give me a heavy metal set, I might get one song right. That's the biggest difference. If somebody said, hey, we're going to do a Tool tribute, show up here tonight, and well, forget it, because I wouldn't get any of them right.
Yeah, right. And that has nothing to do, because you've played a lot of heavy rock.
Sure.
It's just that, and this gets back to the point of like, I think it's always funny, like at the blues jams, for instance, or when you're in a country band, it's not just because it's the particular part of that genre, is that there isn't that many hits and that many stops in some of those songs, or if they do, you can get a real easy from the guitar player, and then stop, you know, and then you're back into it in 4 bars or something, and so they're real easy to cue. But the rock stuff I've noticed, and that's I think maybe one reason, getting back to our original point of why people don't ask drummers in blues bands and stuff to pick songs, is because, like, you want to play it, if you want to play like Pride and Joy, well, we could pick 19 other shuffles that is the same freaking song. Exactly, right. So, okay, let's just play a shuffle and just pick one, a slow blues. Okay, let's just pick one of the 100 there are. But in rock, there's a lot of, deep down, deep down, boom, and then, on all these ends of phrases and stuff, and you really got to kind of know the songs more than country and blues, for example.
Case in
I think
point, yeah.
jazz is very similar to the country
yeah.
and blues, even in the same way, because there's some, but there's a lot of those swing tunes that don't really have hits exactly like rock do,
Right.
where they're super precise. The drummer can kind of do
Right.
whatever accents he wants. There isn't this big spot where we're all unison, drums, bass, and we all, you know, da 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 boom, you know, where we're not supposed to exactly hit that. Jazz is very hard, you know, it's the beats are just way harder, but rock is very specific, and funk I think is very specific in that too, where some of the songs, and country and those you just play through. You've got to kind of know your songs more as rock, right?
Which takes us to the very first question. You know, as a drummer, you need to know the song. You need to be a musician. You need to know how to you know, just as if you know you're going to do a chord transition on a stringed instrument, or you know any you know tone changes or anything vocally. You know, you need to know exactly where that is. You know, obviously perception is we just set a beat and just keep playing, right? But the fact is that in jazz you kind of got a right, left, center thing. You know, you can go off this way, you can go off that way, as long as you know what center is. You know, and especially like progressive style environments, that's welcome and encouraged. You know, but rock is very punctuative, and you got to know the song. Progressive rock, you got to know the song. You got to know where the hits are, the stops are, and you got to know where the timing changes are. And in a couple unique circumstances, and you know, even going back into older rock, you know, there may be tempo changes in the song. It's very uncommon. Even some things that feel like tempo changes are actually just setting up a different attitude, the same tempo. You know, but you know, like I think I want to say "Stairway to Heaven" was one of the first songs that was kind of introduced to the rock world that actually has a physical timing chain, or a change to it. You know, and it bumps up 15-20 beats a minute somewhere, 2/3 of the way down the song when the instruments start coming in. It has this real build to it, you know, which was part of, you know, Robert Plant's genius, you know, how he kind of built that. But then you have, you know, and most recently I'm playing with a Leonard Skinner tribute, Edge of Forever, out of Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. And, you know, I'm playing a song that has a 20 beat, you know, a minute, you know, timing chain, and everybody knows what that song is Freebird, you know. So you know, it literally has a timing change. It goes from like 118 to 151, I believe, somewhere, right? So you know, so there's an actual, you know, example of that. So you got to be, you know, there's musicality there. You got to know where you are. You got to know what you're doing, and then you got to present these hits specifically on time when you got, you know, a 9-piece band all trying to do that at the same time. There's no guesswork at that, you know. So, you know.
One song you and I know really good was the Copperhead Road, right? And we've had some discussions on that song in our previous band, and I don't know, you know, I don't know if I'm correct about that song specifically, but I think one thing that really blew my mind when I first got into town, and definitely when I started working on my albums, is I had this mentality that the drummer just goes and does their thing, but I didn't really realize, you know, those differences between the boom chuck and then the boom chicka doom chicka doom, and then, or the train, or the, you know, these a whole bunch of very, very similar beats in the same tempo. And I think a lot of times when we're with non-trained musicians, somebody hears something where it feels like it speeds up, but it doesn't speed up. The drummer's just doing a different feel right here. The click is still, and he's just doing a train now instead of a boom chuck, and it feels like it speeds up, but really just the energy has changed. And that's always frustrating when I'm dealing with trained musicians. Know this, you know, they know that this is really what's happening. It's still it's still the same tempo throughout the whole song, but what the drummer has done has changed. And that's back to the idea of, with drummers, where people are like, oh, I like that part, and then they kind of try to figure out, well, why is that different from this? oh, the drummer is doing a different feel right here.
Right.
That's why you think this part is so cool.
Right.
It's really the drums. It's not the guitar player getting all the fame.
Right.
It's really the drummer right here
Yeah.
is doing a different thing.
Yep.
And I just think that's really cool that is really why. This is one thing that gets back to our immediate thing, is that I always think of drums and bass that I've learned a ton with here in the last 5 years of really understanding the different kicks and the different feels that you can do, is that I look at the rhythm section sort of exactly like linemen in football, where when it's running right, nobody cares,
Right.
you know, and then when you get a really bad drummer, everything falls.
Right.
You know, I mean, and I'm sure you've probably have not dealt with that too many times because you play drums, but definitely you'd probably agree with that with like a bass.
Oh, yeah.
You know, is when a bass player.
Well, yeah, there's a, you know, I mean, we all have that awkward moment, you know. We don't start out proficient musicians, so, you know, we all have those transitional moments. I have a videotape, VHS tape from the 1980s, you know, and I you know, it was so funny because a band that I was playing in at the time, we got asked to come play this show at City Park, where it was a showcase, basically local talent, all this stuff. This is, you know, we're all, you know, young kids, 18, 17 years old. We get up on the stage, you know, and play this, and you know, to play a set, and we're just all amping out, you know, because we're so thrilled that we're actually playing with a real PA system in front of real people, and this and that.
Right.
Well, you know, we were fully unprepared for this thing. You know, we had no idea what we were doing or what we were getting ourselves into, and we ran out of music very quickly. I mean, it was bad. We were so unprepared. We didn't have a set list. So we were trying to wing it. You know, we were like, what songs do we have? So, you know, captured in, you know, time in a time capsule. You know, where I can never forget it is my first live drum solo. And, you know, it undoubtedly was the worst drum solo in rock and roll history. But at the time, it felt like the best drum solo in rock history.
Yeah.
You know, because I was doing it. I think the only confirmation to me at the time that it wasn't any good is when I got done. You know, there's this awkward, you know, clap here and maybe one here, and it's like, woo.
Yeah, right, yeah.
But,
that feels great, doesn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, so, you know, I mean, we
That's
all
funny.
have those moments as a musician where you can trash something pretty bad, you know, and you learn from it. And
Yeah.
you get better because
Yeah.
you know, and that's my constant reminder ever since 1987, don't ever do that.
Right.
Yeah.
That's really good, man. I mean, I think all of us need to keep that humble mentality, right? It can be real easy to think you're kind of something special,
Right.
any of us, you know, and then all of a sudden you're like, well, you know, and the other thing about that is it's not possible to fail worse than that, right? You know, I mean, you can look at it like that, where it's like, you know, but you know what I'm saying, you know, like, I can't do any worse than that, so the only place to go is up, you know, so that's like,
Absolutely.
So last thing on bands is that one thing that you and I have had many conversations about is the idea of that the thing that I'm really passionate about is like kind of running a band and all the little things that happen with like the personalities of band members and all the relationships and Whit Marsalis always quotes it as the negotiation, especially jazz, about that this person's the prima donna and this guy is maybe the drummer that doesn't want any solos, or that this guy wants to do stuff like the original, this guy wants to purposely not do it like the original, you know, all those little moments. Like what is something in a band that you've had in the past in regards to all that hasn't worked? What's been a moment that's been really bad in that?
Well, you know, unfortunately,
please list people. Please out them. No, I'm just kidding.
You know, I mean,
throw them right under the bus.
Bands are difficult dynamic because, you know, these are a bunch of real creative people to begin with. And, you know, I like to think that, you know, drummers are, you know, we're mathematical, so we're more of the analytical, you know, component to a band sometimes. But, you know, then I have had my fair share of, you know, ups and downs, so I can't really say that that's a fact. But, you know, dealing with different personality types and sensitivity levels, this is like an expression. What we do is like painting on a canvas, you know. So somebody comes up and looks at that canvas after you're done and you're pretty proud of it, you know, and makes a comment about it, you know, that you're not happy with. It can rattle your ego pretty bad. Especially if these are talented musicians or people that you respect. So, I've learned to be very sensitive. I've auditioned people and had them come into my band space and for vocals. And I said, hey, can you just come back next week and do that again? You did a really great job, but, the boys are wanting to hear a little bit more from you. And this gal turns to me and she says, well, I sang my ass off, but I didn't hear you guys do shit. So I was like, well, so here's this, this example of a person that, I wasn't trying to offend her. I was trying to, hopefully we can just bring it up just a notch and get everybody on board with it. But, I offended her. And that's partly because she came out and painted, her canvas and didn't get the response that she was looking for. I've found that there's, that we have lead singer disease, we have lead guitarist disease that we all have to contend with.
Yeah, they get a disease, don't they?
Yeah, and I mean it's and you're very fortunate, and I find that the current setup that I'm in with Edge of Forever out of Leavenworth is this. My lead singer is very, very down to earth and very humble, and probably one of the most talented musicians I know, hands down. He can get on the drum set and play and show me where I messed up. He can get on the guitar and play everybody's part better than they can, typically in some circumstances, because the guy lives, eats, and breathes this stuff. And I say that with all due respect to the other musicians in the band, because I'm fortunate to be in a band with just absolutely phenomenal musicians all the way around. But from vocal talent all the way down the list. But there's always going to be those personality conflicts. There's the real strong lead guy who doesn't mind stepping on toes. We know those guys. The guy that doesn't think twice before he turns around and cuts you off at the knees. Or worse. We've all had that. In recent history. I think you and I can probably affiliate on some of those ideas or thought processes, because we've experienced it, and where it's uncalled for, it could have been handled completely different.
Right.
But I think that's kind of an extreme too, because most of the time it's more of a touchy-feely situation where you might step on somebody's toes and just didn't say the right thing because of their artsy mentality,
The lady, so the example of the lady that you talked about, what as a teacher, I'm always wondering, so is asking the question, is there something I can do about this situation? And what I'm meaning by that is that, is there a moment where I can say this a right way and a wrong way and I need to pick the right way? Or is it maybe the situation where you're talking about where I picked the right way and she still took it wrong? So then that leads me to the next question is that moment, is there anything that's going to fix this right now? I mean, and that really annoys me, because there's a thing I can't do anything about this right now.
Right.
Because they're going to take it personal. No matter what criticism I put out there, no matter how I say it, they're going to take it personal. So my next question to myself is, what do I do now? Yeah,
you can't reel it back in. Once the horses leave the barn, it's kind of like, okay, it's out there floating around and go into damage control,
Right.
But then you got to be careful that you don't show all your cards, because in a circumstance like that, we weren't 100% positive. But you do want to give her another chance, because she might have had it. So we don't want to say, hey, forget what I said, you're in. And have her come back and regret that decision.
Right.
Although I will say that I've seen her many times perform since then. She's in one of Kansas City's top bands now out there, and I regret that moment.
Yeah. Because in that audition situation, you're not seeing her after 4 gigs doing this material.
Exactly.
And you've seen her in other bands and you go like, wow, she's tearing this up.
Tearing it up.
But in this audition, it was whatever it was. And so I guess like my thing is like dealing with the personalities is really like finding some sort of general rule that people can think about when they're dealing with people in a band. I think the criticism thing that you were talking about is really interesting, because all of us trained people, I think all of us that have taken many, many lessons, I think we can be better at criticism and we can't be as well, because we're used to taking criticism because we've had, you know, I've had 400 violin lessons of criticism. So when somebody says something, it's kind of like,
it rolls off.
it doesn't roll off. You're like, oh, okay, you know. We never questioned our teachers, ever.
Right.
You know, we just go, okay, you're awesome, I'm not worthy, all right, I need to do this, okay.
Yeah.
But then it can also be also bad after a while, because you know you have training and you know you're good. So when somebody does give you criticism, you're like, I have a degree from blah blah blah, you know, university of your choice, and you know, I know, and you know, and so like, I'm finding that there isn't these rules.
Right.
It's different with every person, and that's really, really, really frustrating. You know,
I think it's doubly frustrating. Again, you know, I'm just frank about it. Dealing with musicians, it's not like I'm dealing with a team of engineers. You know, where it's just black and white. You know, we're doing mathematical equations and coming out with, you know, stress tests on steel structures and, you know, finite analysis and things like this. No, we're dealing with people's emotions and their art and their and what this is their insides coming out. They're demonstrating who they are through this, you know, beautiful, you know, presentation. You know, so it's a totally different animal, and I don't know that there is a way to fix it. I mean, you can go down and you know, go down a list of, you know, interviews from different, you know, rock and roll musicians or musicians in general throughout history, and hear, you know, the difficulties band members have had with this guy or that guy. You know, and it's almost, you know, comical, because you know it's there, and everybody's had a situation with you know, some, you know, eccentricities, you know, for lack of better terms.
I mean, we're dealing with a bunch of 50-year-old children, right? I mean, you know, I mean, all of us are, you know, I always joke, we're all adults technically, you know, I mean, like, and it's really interesting to deal with those people, but yeah, I guess it's just something for me that I'll have to keep thinking about, and it may be one of those things that you're dealing with bandmates, you'll have to take it on like a process of elimination kind of situation, and you're like, well, I tried this thing 3 times and it blew up in my face really bad every time, so maybe I don't have an answer, but I know it's not that. You know, I know it's don't say, hey, screw you, you know, like, so. But yeah, man. So last bit that I wanted to talk to you about is what was really cool, and I've never really had this before, but you had have been doing this kind of big professional career of gigging large venues, but you decided to, as a heavy metal drummer, like, understand what I'm saying here, heavy metal drummer, decided to kind of try to take up violin here later in life.
Yes. And
for me, as having a student that has been this professional already in some field, and then me teaching them has been an interesting situation for me.
Right.
It's been, I'll just say for myself, it's been really good, because there is so much stuff that I don't have to explain to you. You know, what is a quarter note, right? What is a da-da-da? You know, it's like, you know, and you already know if it's wrong. You know, I mean, you can tell if I'm off rhythm, or if I'm off pitch, or if yourself is off pitch. And so that was nice for me, because we can get right down to it. There's not all this extra crap. But talk about that little kind of journey you've been on.
It's it has been super gratifying to the extent of, you know, I mean, I've been a rhythmic musician, you know, my entire life. Everything that I've done, you know, and I've dabbled with many different instruments, you know, piano, guitar, you know, whatever.
You played sax too?
Yeah, I played sax.
Saxophone, right, yeah.
And, you know, it's kind of like, all right, there's my, you know, jazz metaphor, right, left, center kind of thing. You know, I always kind of center back on drums, you know, it's been my go-to. And part of that, you know, I think you and I have discussed this in the past, was it's identifying is what you are. You know, I've picked up the guitar and played some neat songs, and people going, wow, you know, we didn't know you played guitar. And I'm like, yeah, I can play it, but I'm a drummer.
Yeah.
You know, play a song on the piano. Well, I can play some songs on the piano.
It's bread and butter,
right.
Yeah.
So now this has been a different kind of thing for me, because a lot of things that I've done have been kind of like supportive of what I ultimately want to do. Sometimes I'm in my studio working on drums, and it's like, man, what is that guitar riff? I'll go pick up the guitar and I'll play that riff just so I can remember what that part sounded like. So if I'm developing something for it, I can go back over the drums. So it's more of a means to an end.
Yeah, yeah.
Whereas this is a totally, different venture. This is like, I want to play the fiddle.
Mm-hmm.
I want to play the violin, and so playing it is that's one animal, and learning to play it is a challenge, because if there was ever an instrument that was meant to drive a person insane, it's definitely the violin. It's amongst the most difficult instruments, if not the most difficult. And I'm sure I could get a lot of support on that statement.
Yes.
So people
Well,
ask me,
what did you call it? Whose instrument is it?
oh, this is Satan's instrument, man. I mean, he created this thing to drive people mad. I want to turn it into a hatchet most nights.
Yeah.
But Jack Benny says the only instrument you can play every day for years only to be lousy. It's a fact. I mean, it's difficult to play, but I think it's just like singing in the shower. I'm a rock star when nobody's around, but get in front of somebody, and that's different. And I've had pretty good opportunities to play around now with some people and that, and it's worked out. It's getting better, but as you would attest to, some of the first recitals, I would get up there and I thought I had my stuff put together and I knew the song and I could play it well, record it, you heard it, sound great. I get up there and it sounded like I got the best vibrato in the world from my shakes.
Yeah, right. You said that at the recital. You're like, guys, this is not vibrato. This is me shaking.
Yeah. So it's but I think that all boils down to the whole center on that whole deal is identifying myself as a fiddle player. So Tim, what do you play? I'll play drums, but I also can play fiddle. Until I can look you in the eye and go, I'm a fiddle player.
Right.
Then I think that's the transition point, and I'll know that. And I think I already do. You and I had a conversation on it, maybe a year and a half ago, where you said, it's just like when you play drums, you're not thinking about every beat you're playing when you get out there to do it, because it's become muscle memory. You know it well enough. It's just you're confident it's going to come out the same way it did when you're back in your studio. So yeah, it's a huge transition though.
Yeah.
Fun and definite worthwhile journey. But
yeah, that's great. I mean, it's been really fun to teach you some lessons, because it's just a ridiculous instrument. I don't know why any of us are playing it. I mean, it's a horrible instrument. It's horrible in regards to how hard it is. I mean, it's a wonderful instrument, but it's just one of those things that you don't have any wiggle room on anything. You wiggle too hard, and on your bow, and you scratch, right? I mean, you're barely off like that far, and you're out of tune. It's like there's no room for failure, and it's one of those. I've heard this quote from some people that are like 87 or something, and they've been playing for like 79 years. I mean, they've been playing for a long time. And the guy's like, so how good are you? And he's like, I'm making progress. That's his answer. And that first of all, as a musician, that mentality is wonderful.
Oh yeah.
Because that's a very humble mentality that it's one of those things, and I think this might be a general rule for instruments in general. It will never be Rob 1, violin 0.
Right.
It's always going to be violin 1, me 0, because you cannot perfect these things. But it's that also mentality of a violin where, I mean, if you play 87 years, you might get somewhere. Barely.
You're getting there.
Yeah, you're just getting there, but that's really. Yeah, and so I know that one thing that's cool that you've done is instead of getting to a point where you're like, where they have this in blues musicians and country guys, where you play and you learn your stuff in your 20s and teens, and then they get to a point where they kind of plateau, where they sort of learned blues and they've learned country, and then they get to a point where they can kind of go to a jam and they don't really need to kind of practice anymore, where they kind of had that their stuff. But that's so cool that you've taken this moment where you're, you know, later in your career and you're still pushing and still searching and still trying and whatever. I think that's so cool. And I mean, do you see that a lot of people who don't have that mentality, especially
Yeah.
later in their careers?
Yeah, most people get to a point they're comfortable or they're satisfied, and I hear a lot of people talking about, you know, at a point where they'll, you know, I'm gonna retire. I'm doing this up until this point, and then I'm gonna retire, and I can see that, you know, if you're just really bored to death, you know, with what you're doing. But you know, to me, music is a living thing. You know, I can go back to 1987, you know, in 2 seconds when a song comes on the radio. You know, it triggers things in my brain where I'm not just listening to the song, I'm feeling the music. I mean, really, I mean, as corny as that may sound, it's you know, there's no way I want to give that up, because there are some things that, you know, I mean, and I'm not there yet, but you know, if I was in my 80s, I'm certain that I would feel exactly how I do now. At near half century mark here, you know, I look at things that I did with nostalgia, and that is a trigger. And suddenly I'm 20 years old, and you know, life is, you know, new, and you know, so that I would never want to give up that, you know, ability to have those emotional journeys, and music is like that transcending kind of, you know, device.
Yeah.
So I love it, man. There's no way. And when I'm done, you know, once I conquer the fiddle in the next 6 months, you know, we'll move on to something
You
else.
will. You will. I have faith.
You know, we'll keep moving, man. I'll never stop.
Yeah, that's great, man. That's a great attitude. So two more quick ones here for you. So I'm always interested, because I'm in this area here where, yes, I've kind of played quite a bunch of years already, but I still feel like a very much of a baby in the sense of my gigging career, especially in the band sense of doing the rock stuff and whatever. And so I'm really fascinated by the things that I've learned in regards to kind of starting this journey of the gigging and being out with like club owners and like booking bands and running a band, or just being a gigging musician. Do you have any kind of advice for those kind of 20, 30-ish year olds that are kind of getting into this new professional scene or whatever? You got any advice for them?
Yeah, I'd say the biggest thing is marketing yourself. It's so difficult when you're a young band. Nobody knows who you are, and you're going into these weary club owners who have seen, you know, a million people come through there and guarantee them they're going to pull a crowd, you know, which is always the rub, you know, is whether or not the band's supposed to pull a crowd or the clubs are supposed to. You know, of course, you know, as a musician, I'm always going to say, hey, you're the one with the business establishment. I can't, you know, drag around a fan base to every place I play if I play 50 times a year in your community. But I think networking is huge. You know, if you really have the mentality to take your band to the next step and not playing little corner bars and things like that, you need to pay your dues, get that exposure, and, you know, make some, you know, relationships with club owners along the way, you know, and that's a process, you know, befriending these people, and you know, kind of, I'll scratch your back, you scratch mine kind of thing. You know, sometimes you got to help out. Maybe you're going to go run backline, or, you know, help set up stages, which I've done a lot of. You know, hey, you know, I'll help you out, and you get to be a friend, you know, with those people. Next thing you know, they're going, well, you got a band too, don't you? Well, sure, yeah, we'll do this. So, you know, that in the earlier phases, that's paying your dues. You know, you got to kind of look for opportunities to do that, but then don't discount putting together nowadays, especially an EPK. You know, if you're a small band and you really want to get out there, take some band pictures, put together a small press kit, even if you spend a couple $100 on, you know, some decent recordings of your band, so you can have some material to give to people. That's like that really polished resume. You know, going into a company, you want to get a job when they've got a bunch of dog-eared, you know, stapled pieces of paper that came off the fax machine from everybody else, but you've got yours in a, you know, immaculate little binder.
Yeah.
You know? So that's what it does for you. And I would highly suggest, you know, anybody that's, you know, new to the industry or young, trying to get their foot in the door with these different club owners and things like that is, give them something to chew on. And you don't have to be the most technically, advanced band in the world. Just, you have a good polished product and you can show it and demonstrate that going in the door.
That's a great, yeah, that would probably be mine as well to any young, is the general, because we have that a lot coming out of the academia, is that academia is basically been all about learning how to play music beautifully and then learning kind of all the ins and outs of the actual music, knowing your chords, knowing your history, knowing your, it's all about the music and playing it beautifully. But what we miss is when now you're in this gigging world is, and I think you're basically hitting on basically the business side of music. And there's a lot of parts to that, right? There's your networking part, there's your networking in regards to other musicians, the networking of the club owners, the getting your network in regards to people bringing to your shows, the getting your press kit, your website. I mean, there's all these parts. I totally agree with you that's something that we don't get taught.
No.
Right? No. How many videos on the internet are about here's how to play a G sharp half diminished and here's how to play your train beat, but how many videos are out there really about, and one thing that I think is really funny about that is that in college, when you go ask a question, they just answer it, because that's what they're there for. You're in teaching land. And so anytime you have a question, the teacher's like, oh yes, sweetie, you do this, this, and this, and then, but as soon as you get out to these band guys, you go like, hey, how do you market yourself? And they're like, oh, well, you just, got to figure it out, and that's the one place where I don't think it's that they do have bad advice or they don't know what they're doing. I think that's the one that everybody tries to keep to themselves a little bit. Have you ever noticed that?
Yeah, I do. And I noticed that typically, it depends how far up the ranks you are, as far as, musicianship. You're not going to see a band, at the level of the bands that I play that are out promoting themselves. We play in bands that have promoters. And that's part of that paying your dues and getting up to that, place in life where you can show that to a management group that's gonna promote you and get you gigs. That's ordinarily how the industry is run on the more professional side. But if if you're satisfied with being playing at the Right Room in downtown Kansas City on 3 times 4 times a year, the owner down there, or you're the house band or whatever, perfectly fine. There's there's nothing wrong with that at all. But it just depends on what your level of motivation in the industry is. Do you want to be a professional, well marketed musician, or do you want to be a clubby, corner band kind of setup? It's really, you got to pick your goals. There's nothing wrong with either one of those things. In fact, some of the funnest gigs I've ever had were, in the hole in the wall bars, and got some good stories from some of those.
Oh gigs. Yeah. So the last thing I'll say is give me one. Give me like a PG-13 maybe version. I mean, if you had some kind of crazy gig. I mean, you talked about the one where he gave you 1 day for like 60 songs or whatever. I mean, that's something that
I almost shouldn't. I got to be careful what I say because I'm still friends with some of these people. But we had one where we went in there and it was cocktails, nonstop cocktails, and I don't mind having some drinks. I'm not a big drinker, but we had. We were being served cocktails all night. We didn't really realize that we were, which was the problem, because the way the stage set was, the bartender and the servers could, bring a drink and refresh a drink on the stage. So I'm playing along and I'm thinking everything's going right, and I have a crown, oil in a cup, and I'm just sipping on the thing. But it, after about 10th song and we're getting ready to take a break, I noticed that cup, I haven't really touched it. I'm thinking, pretty proud of myself. I'm really not, going through these things. Well, by probably the 10th song in our second set, I noticed that I'm having the same condition on this cup, not paying any attention to the fact that it's been refilled or replaced, 5-6 times during this set.
Wow.
and we're getting to the end of the song, and my eyes are rattling. I can't remember the song, and I can't. It's just everything is going wrong. My legs are going numb. Literally sitting on the drum kit, my legs are going numb. And I realized at the end of the set that I had probably, I don't know, 5-6 Crown Royals per set.
Yeah.
So just the rest of the night wasn't going to happen. I mean, that's all there is to it.
Right.
Well, I wasn't the only one that this happened to. Our lead singer, this had been happening to all night that night. And we get done and we're packing up our gear at the end of this, humiliating set where our lead singer had announced the name of our band about 15 times during the last set because she was so intoxicated herself.
Yeah, that's funny. Yeah.
So then she ends up pulling some of our rigs off the stage, and causing some damage to some equipment at the end of it.
Yeah.
But it was one of those nights that you'd prefer not to have happened.
Oh, sure, yeah.
But all I can say is that is not a typical operating order for me as a musician. That was one of those things that you hope never happens, and it does, and there's really no excuse for not paying attention except for you're kind of caught up in the moment.
You're right, that's funny, yeah. How come every time one of these funny gig stories that somebody tells me, how come alcohol is involved every single time? Is that telling us anything?
Yeah, if there's a nightclub involved, there's generally going to be an alcohol situation. So, but yeah,
we're the only. I mean, besides for like airplane pilot and maybe like cops or something, we're the only thing that gets to like drink on the job, right? Pilots,
and
right? Doctors, right? They're drinking on the job, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean that's just really funny, and that kind of happens though too of the tough thing about our industry is that's one of the what I wanted to do again this show about is all those elephant in the room kind of questions that nobody really addresses. And one of them is addiction, in our sphere of either drugs or alcohol.
Absolutely.
And it happens
It's
a
a
lot
big deal.
because you get there and it's such an intense field to be in because it's just emotionally intense. Of you're pouring your heart out, and then it's hard when you get done to done with the gig. And then you don't have any more of that intenseness. The intenseness is gone, and the stimulation is gone.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden you need to keep that level up, and it happens a lot where all of us tend to start smoking pot or drinking or whatever, like.
It definitely is tough because like you say, there's this adrenaline and this intensity. I mean, going back to the violin recital. I was not nervous, but I had this adrenaline just because my lack of confidence in that situation where, my whole body was going into, just this, shaking thing, but I think a lot of us experience that and we know it of ourselves. So we have our little combination of things that we do to kind of get us in the playing music mode, and some people just never get beyond that. They never learn to, they've got this crutch and that's just what they're going to do. I don't find myself in that situation very often. And with drumming, I prefer water. I get dehydrated usually.
Right.
And a lot of times I play with my shirt off just because I get so hot. And currently in the band I'm in, it's part of the character that I'm playing. Artemis Pyle in this band. And it's typical. I always play with that, so it actually works for me well because that's the way I like to play. But so lots of people. Find themselves doing things like that to get over their intimidation of being in front of people or just the overall stress of the situation that they're getting ready to be in.
Yeah.
May not admit to it, but I know they do.
Yeah. That's right, man. What else you got, man?
Well, I don't know. I think we're.
I think we hit a lot of it.
Yeah, I think we did pretty good. But I think Kansas City's got one of the best music scenes. I was going to say earlier, moving here from Southern California, it was more of a political scene in California. I think that the opportunity to play music in the greater Kansas City area is underrated. It has been absolutely wonderful to be able to move in and out of the music scenes as you can here, like no other state. You know, we've played with guys from Nashville, for instance, and they'll talk about the politics and how, you know, they'll drum your butt out of there. You know, you're not, you know, here it's like, hey, come on in, bro. You know, you want to sit in and play? Sure. You know, you might get a, you know, jackwagon now and again that's going to give you a hard time, but
pretty accepting scene, I think,
scene.
and they're very, very tight knit here. I mean, there's like 1,000 or 3,000, you know, pretty quality musicians in town,
Some
and
of the best.
and we have such like a jam centric town that I think because everybody has to be in 2 or 3 bands, like just logistically we have to get to know everybody because we just have I mean, everybody every night needs a sub in town somewhere.
Exactly.
You know, I mean, because everybody's just overlapping bands, and like so it's just in your best interest to be pleasant. It's not it's a competition, but not really. You know, I mean, everybody's got to know each other, and that's really cool. And you're making the point that I'm not sure if every other city is like that.
Oh, no, I can tell you they're not.
Yeah.
You know, there are probably, you know, other places you can go and experience the same thing, but just the pure pool of talent that's here in Kansas City is just amazing to me. Maybe that's because, you know, in this environment you have more of an opportunity to rub shoulders with people, you know, that in other more politically charged environments, you know, you wouldn't get to, you know, or you know.
I know that there's a lot of places like Cincinnati, Oklahoma City, maybe. I mean, some of these other towns that might be this 2, 3, whatever million people that don't have our music scene.
Oh, yeah.
There's a lot of these towns that are like that, you know, and so like that's one of the reasons why I wanted to do the show, is because there's so many good musicians here, and I wanted to get a chance to sit down and talk to them. So
They really are.
Yeah, man. So Tim, Andreas, thanks for coming, man.
Absolutely.
Thanks for
Appreciate you having me.
And yeah, man, drummer in town. What was your band's name one more time that you're playing with right
Edge
now?
of Forever out of Fort Leavenworth. We are currently on break for the winter. We've had a few complications, some health issues, but we're getting ready to go full bore. We just finished some more demo material that's going to be pumping out there pretty quick. I think it's pretty exciting. We're gonna take the stage by storm next year. So I figure sometime early spring we're gonna be a force to be reckoned with. Not that we aren't already.
That's great, man. You definitely keep it up.
Absolutely.
So that's our show. We'll see you guys next time on KC Music Talk. See ya.
See you later.